you so much. I hope you noticed my SCAD book. I rewrote my speech on it. It's absolutely a delight to be here. And I don't know if you've also noticed my earrings, which are made by a SCAD graduate. And I'm proud to be wearing them. And don't they look gorgeous? For those of you who have not heard me before, this accent is for real. I say that because my accent has been a little bit the bane of my existence. I've tried everything I could to change it, to no avail, as you can see. And I didn't relax about it until I met Henry Kissinger, who said to me, don't worry about your accent. In American public life, you can never overestimate the advantages of complete and total incomprehensibility. In fact, the truth is that my ex-husband even gave me a really passive-aggressive present that had to do with my accent shortly before we divorced. That's not why we divorced. But he gave me a dialect coach to follow me around for 2 weeks to give me notes on my accent. And by the end of it, I knew everything I was doing wrong, but I could not remain a functioning, spontaneous human being and practice everything she taught me. So that was when I decided, that's it, that's my accent. And you know what, whatever it is that we don't like about ourselves, in the end, the more we can embrace it, the easier it is to get on with our lives and do what we want to do. So remember that. It may not be your accent, it may be something else, but maybe there is a lesson here for all of us. So I loved my afternoon here. I loved the writer's house with writers sitting on the verandas and writing and discussing, and I loved being part of a non-fiction writing class and discussing all the essays that they were writing, ranging from kissing to the pain scale to fatherhood. And what an amazing group of students. I love also the fact that Atlanta SCAD and the Huffington Post share a birthday. We're both born in 2005. You in March, we in May. So you are 2 months ahead of us. But we are both going to be 10 years old in 2015. So maybe we can celebrate together. And I invited the students at the class I was part of to take their theses, their essays, and post them on the Huffington Post. And I want to invite the rest of you to do the same. Because one of the greatest joys of founding the Huffington Post has been that, as well as being a journalistic enterprise with now over 850 journalists in 11 countries that won a Pulitzer for traditional investigative journalism, we are also a platform. And that's one of the things that gives me the greatest joy, where anybody with something interesting to say can say it. And bringing together these two worlds of traditional journalism and a platform with more conversational, spontaneous writing is something which I believe is the future of journalism, the future of media. And it's increasingly that convergence that we see between traditional media and new media. So we are here to talk about creativity and innovation, and I very much look forward to your questions. And I want to divide what I want to say into 3 parts. The first is, what are all the obstacles to creativity and innovation? What gets in the way? Because if you think of it, children are born creative. You see little children, they sing, they dance, they paint, and they're very unself-conscious about it. And as we get older, there is what I call in Thrive, my latest book, the obnoxious roommate living in our head. That voice of doubt and fear and worry and self-criticism that starts getting louder and louder. And whatever it is, the voice will tell us that's not good enough. Do you think we can put the lights a little higher so I can see everybody? Because you can see me, but I can't see you at all. It's pitch black out there. This is so much better. It's perfect. Now I can see if you're interested, if I should change the subject and talk about something completely different. So it's imperative to trust our creative instinct, even if this doesn't turn out to be something we can make a living from. And that's one of the things that's happening more and more now. I love the story, for example, of people who love to sing, and they never made it as professional singers. In fact, many of them didn't even pursue it. And now they've created what are known as threshold choirs. And they go to hospices and hospitals and they sing at the bedside of ill patients. And in fact, even dying patients, because hearing is the last sense that goes. So I love the idea of taking something which is a creative outlet and combining it with something that is about our giving instinct. And there are so many examples like that that allow us to take what we love to do creatively and continue to do it at any stage in our lives. So the obnoxious roommate is a big obstacle to our creativity. In fact, I know in my own life, when I started writing, my voice of self-censorship was so intense. At the time that I started writing, I was writing longhand. That's how ancient I am. That I would fool myself by putting red question mark next to every word or sentence that I wasn't sure about, so that I could keep going. Sometimes you would see a page and it was covered in red question marks. But as all of you who write here know, it's much easier to go back and edit yourself than to keep editing as you are writing, which completely blocks the creative process. The other thing that I did, I started writing down my dreams. Because, I wouldn't show them to anybody, I wouldn't dare. And the process was very liberating because it got me just writing and freed up that creative part of ourselves that sometimes is so blocked by our self-censorship. The other major obstacle to our creativity is how endlessly distracted we are. And technology isn't helping at all here. We were talking about that at the class. How often you sit down to write something and your smartphone is beside you. And you get a text and you check your text. And you get an email and you check your email. And you get a call and you check who it is. And do you realize how incredibly undermining that is of the creative process? And how absolutely essential it is for us to learn to focus. As Steve Jobs said, the important thing is to know what you're saying no to, because that's what determines what you're going to say really yes to. And there is a great term known as constant partial attention. And that's really what a lot of our lives are about. We're constantly giving part of our attention to something, and often to 2 or 3 things at the same time. Because there's this illusion that multitasking makes us productive, when in fact, new scientific findings are making it very clear that there is no such thing as multitasking. It's actually task switching, and it's the most stressful and least creative thing we can do. And I speak as somebody who was a big culprit of that. I live in New York, and I remember the day when I stopped multitasking while walking the streets of New York. And multitasking meant I would either be on the phone walking, or worse, texting while walking, which is really dangerous. And then I started noticing things. And I remember noticing the building right next to my apartment in New York. And I saw this amazing ornamentation at the top. And I said to a friend of mine who was with me, I said, when did this building go up? And she said, 1890. So I think it's very important to do everything we can to learn to disconnect from technology in order to connect with ourselves and our creativity. I'm not being anti-technology. Trust me, I run a 24/7 technology/media company. But because of that, perhaps, I'm very aware of the dangers of hyperconnectivity, the dangers to our creativity, not to mention our health and our productivity. So there are actually apps. I know it's a paradox, but there is actually technology that you can use to help you disconnect from technology. And that's fine with me. Because if you think of the internet and our whole technological revolution as the Garden of Eden, our hyperconnectivity is the snake in the garden. And it's a very wily snake. And hyperconnectivity is addictive. Have you noticed how hard it is to disconnect from your devices? So I highly recommend taking one of these apps, whichever you like. I have actually an appendix of 12 of them at the end of Thrive. My favorite is one called Antisocial. It puts all your incoming things on hold, everything. And you're there alone with a blank page, or if you're painting, the black canvas, or even just the memo that you're going to write, whatever it is that requires your full attention. And I remember the last time my mother got angry with me was when she saw me answering my email and talking to my children at the same time. And she, if you think I have a strong Greek accent, you should have heard my mother. She said to me, I abhor multitasking. And she kept talking about the joys of unitasking. And they're absolutely essential to our creativity. Incidentally, another thing that is very important for our creativity is recognizing that, and that's my second point, that connecting to the depths of ourselves is where the most creative thoughts and ideas come from. And if you think throughout history, we had Steve Jobs, for example, talk about how his best ideas that led to the most iconic Apple products came after Zen meditation. Because he said that was when I could hear more subtle things. Now you can replace the word meditation for whatever has meaning for you. It could be prayer, it could be fly fishing, just something that you cannot do while being on your smartphone, something that you have to be completely present for. And I actually love what Gladstone said when he was Prime Minister of England. He said, I pray every day for 1 hour, except when I'm very busy, when I pray for 2. And that's another indication that the busier we get, the more important it is to preserve our own essence from which our own creativity springs. You know, David Lynch, the director, said it beautifully about big fish and small fish. He said, you can catch small fish on the surface, but if you want to catch big fish, big ideas, you got to go to the depths. And why do you think you often have your best ideas in the shower? Oh my God, I'm terribly worried that somebody's going to invent a smartphone you can take to the shower. And that will be the end of many great ideas. But if you think of it, Archimedes, who came up with this great displacement scientific theory, came up with it in the bath. Remember the famous story? He ran naked out in the streets of Syracuse shouting, Eureka, I found it. It would have made for a great Instagram moment, you have to admit. But the point is that he was in the bath, you know, he was relaxed. And so great ideas come during relaxation. Newton came up with the law of gravity while having tea under an apple tree, caught in a moment of reverie, and saw that apple come down, and this whole theory of gravity emerged. The stories are endless, and some of the most creative people have allowed these times of renewal, regeneration, into their daily lives. It's really a kind of digital detox, if you want, the way we would present it today. And some of the people I most admire, some of the most creative people, integrate digital detoxes into their lives. In fact, come to think of it, going back to the creation of heaven and earth, God worked really hard for 6 days and then took the 7th day off, right? I mean, that was the equivalent of a detox. There was no digital. But how many people here truly take a full day off to really recharge and reconnect with themselves? We're just discovering now that all these practices that have been kind of honored from time immemorial actually have a real value to them. But our culture has been the victim of the collective delusion that in fact only through burnout and sleep deprivation and exhaustion are we really successful. And we need to put an end to that. So the third point I want to make is that whatever area you are in, whether it is the creative arts or business or politics, big ideas are really what disrupt the status quo and lead to the next game-changing event or era. And this, Heraclitus actually, there are so many Greek philosophers, you can mix them up, but you notice I'm only quoting Greeks tonight. Heraclitus said that you can never step into the same river twice. And this is a big part of our culture now, the constant innovation, constant disruption. It's impossible now to achieve something and just say, this is it, I created this website or this business and now I can just maintain it. Because change is happening so fast that all of us are in a constant process of disrupting ourselves. Otherwise somebody else is going to disrupt us. And that's why it's more imperative than ever to be able to nurture our creative power so that we can notice the new opportunities and also notice the icebergs before they hit the Titanic. And I recently moderated a panel at a conference on disruption. And it included the CEO of eBay and the CEO of Yelp and the CEO of Chobani Yogurt. Now, who would have thought that you could disrupt yogurt? It's been around since the 1st century AD. It's one of the biggest Greek exports after democracy. And yet Hamdi Ulukaya, who is actually Turkish, disrupted an industry that everybody thought was kind of completely established and impossible to disrupt. And all of these three leaders of their own businesses were just talking about what do they do to keep their creativity and their capacity to innovate alive. One of the things I liked from John Donahue, the CEO of eBay, he said that every month he meets with the founder of Airbnb because he likes to learn from somebody young who has completely disrupted the hotel industry. You all know what Airbnb is. You can go on their website and find a room in somebody's home. Can you believe that this would take off the way it did, the way Uber did? All these ideas that seemed absolutely impossible to get as big as they got, and yet they did. We should actually go back and find out what were the founders doing when they came up with these big ideas. Maybe they're all in the shower. So what we're learning from both established but successful businesses that are constantly disrupting themselves and from new startups is that there is no way anymore that you can future-proof a business. Remember, they used to say, how do you future-proof your business? How do you make it basically immune to change? The answer is you can't. The only way to future-proof a business, or indeed to continue innovating yourself, whatever you are doing, is to create a culture of constant creative disruption. And that is really about the alchemy of the people that you bring together. How do you create a culture where everybody feels free to express themselves, even if that means contradicting something that the leaders of the company is saying? And for us at the Huffington Post, it's been very important for everybody, including the youngest interns, to know that they can come up with ideas, they can challenge something we're doing, they can come up with a better way of doing it. And at the same time, for everybody to know that they're valued for who they are, not just for what they do. And that's where we have 2 nap rooms in our offices, where people can have a nap if they are tired, because we really believe that if you have a nap and then you go back to work, you're going to be more creative. Have you ever tried to do something creative when you're exhausted? It's not the best place from which to create. I remember being in a brainstorming meeting before my own wake-up call 7 years ago when I collapsed from burnout and started thinking about all these things. But I remember that meeting as though it was yesterday. It was a brainstorming meeting in the first year of the Huffington Post about some new editorial sections that we were going to launch. And I was so exhausted that I saw a desk at the end of the room, and I thought to myself, if I go and crawl under this desk and go to sleep, do you think anybody will notice? Have you ever been that exhausted? Well, all you can do when you're that exhausted is transactional things. You can maybe be at a meeting but not really contribute. You can maybe answer your emails, just because you can answer emails with about 5% of your attention most of the time, and make mistakes, but that's okay. But that's really what now we're beginning to realize, that we need to sort of honor ourselves and create a culture that honors each other if we're going to create a culture of creativity and innovation. Another thing that we've established is an email policy. We let everybody know that when they're off work, they're off email. We want them to recharge and come back recharged. We don't want them to assume that they have to be on all the time. And now we are seeing more and more companies having what they call predictable time off. People need predictable time off. And what we say is that if there is an emergency, we'll call you or text you, but otherwise you're off. Because if you're perpetually on, you're never truly on. You're operating from the shallows that we talked about earlier, rather than being able to dip into your depths. And that's also when you make the most mistakes. I quote Bill Clinton in the book, who said, "My most important mistakes," he said, "I made when I was tired." He did not specify what mistakes. But we can all agree that when we were tired, that's when we made our most important mistakes. That's when we missed the little red flags that could have prevented us from making a terrible mistake. That's when we missed the opportunities that could have led to something major happening. And we're now seeing all over the world that more and more companies are actually recognizing the importance of prioritizing a culture of creativity and innovation to recruitment, retention, and being able to come up with the best ideas. Wouldn't you rather work for a company like that? And increasingly, as talent is the most rare resource that we have. it's imperative for companies, whatever field they're in, to prioritize the treatment of their employees if you're going to attract the most creative, innovative employees. Another change that we see happening is getting away from this emphasis on the short term, quarterly earnings, short-term horizons, because all big ideas are not short-term. They take longer to incubate. They need wider and longer horizons. I love the way a lot of these delusions are being one by one dismantled. Another delusion that I loved seeing dismantled in the pages of Forbes magazine actually was the delusion that if you start up a business, you have to just run ragged and drive yourself basically to complete exhaustion and sleep deprivation. And the writer of the piece said, three-quarters of startups fail. That's kind of a famous statistic in Silicon Valley and everywhere. Startup entrepreneurs are notoriously sleep deprived. So maybe if they got a good 8-hour sleep, fewer of them would fail. Has anybody thought of that? Instead of assuming that it goes with the territory. So the other thing that I've noticed, especially for my own daughter, I have two daughters, and my younger daughter graduated in art history and is a painter. And when she tells people that she's a painter, there is like this look, which is like, they may not say it, but it means like, yeah, but what do you really do? Have you gotten that? If you tell something that you're a writer or a painter, I mean, here you are, you're in the world of people who want to be writers and painters and designers, and you need to just trust yourself to say that. I said to my daughter, either you're going to trust yourself to say that and be met with blank stares or worse, or you need to come up with another answer and say, I'm writing a biography of Lincoln. And that's okay, everybody would find, okay, fine, that will take you about 10 years. And they can stop asking you for the next 10 years while you're building your career as an artist. But that is really about a larger point, which is that very often when you have any kind of creative idea, you're going to be met by naysayers. Trust me, when I came up with the idea of the Huffington Post, it was not universally welcome. I remember some of the reviews on our first day. One of them actually I have learned by heart. It said, the Huffington Post is an unsurvivable failure. It is the movie equivalent of Gigli, Ishtar, and Heaven's Gate rolled into one. For those of you who are not movie buffs, these are all three major disasters. So when you get reviews like that, you've got to really trust your own vision and be willing to not be universally approved while you're trying to make something work, and it doesn't happen overnight. And for us women, it's sometimes even harder because we basically want to get it all right immediately from day one. And we want it all to be perfect, don't we? And we want everybody to like us, right? And we want everybody to approve of us. So it's really hard to just listen to all that nasty stuff that is being said about us. And sometimes we just want to go crawl under the bed covers and maybe go do something different that everybody's going to like say nothing and look pretty. So I think being willing to withstand naysayers in the course of pursuing your own vision and being willing to fail along the way too. Because there's nobody who has succeeded who has not failed along the way. And when we remember that, then we see failure as really part of the process. My mother used to say, failure is not the opposite of success, it's a stepping stone to success. And in many creative businesses, they say that if you don't fail enough, you're not aiming high enough. And that's why companies like Google give their employees 20% time during which they can create. They can come up with their own ideas, and most of them fail. But one of these creative ideas was Gmail. That was worth a lot of 20% free time for a lot of other Google employees who didn't come up with anything as important remotely as Gmail. The whole idea that that's the time when you can create without having to meet a deadline and without having to meet a particular structure demanded by your job is really, really important. And after all, working with the arts is something which is so critical in living a full life. It's really feeding our souls. And that's why I find it a little troubling when so many museums now are being overrun by technology. And you go into a museum and you see people with their apps in front of a painting, and they spend, I've actually spent some time looking at how people go into museums or galleries. And very often they spend more time reading their app than looking at the painting. And I think to myself, why didn't you stay home? What's the point? And my daughter, the painter, the one who's writing the Abraham Lincoln biography, was given an assignment in her last year in college to go to pick a painting, they were in London at the time, at the National Gallery, and stand in front of it for 2 hours and write about it. Maybe a professor here will ask the students to do the same thing and they'll never forgive me. And she did that. And what was so interesting, she wrote about her experience. She said it was like a runner's high. At first it was like frustrating, hard, she couldn't wait for it to end, and then she kind of felt that incredible depth of her connection to the painting. And 40 minutes into the experience, the guard approached her and asked her suspiciously, "What are you doing?" And she had to tell him that she was looking at the painting in the National Gallery. Supposedly that's what the paintings are there for. And that's how hard it's becoming now. Standing in front of a painting for anything longer than a couple of minutes max is now suspicious. So what do we do to recapture that sense of wonder, which is at the heart of art, and which is also essential if we're going to tap into the deeper parts of ourselves? It's really, to me, amazing when we rediscover the wonder of art, the wonder of nature, and bring it into our lives with a sense of kind of awe and reverence for even the most ordinary beauties that surround us, but so often we just take for granted. So, to wrap it all up, because I want to leave a lot of room for questions and discussion, because for me it's all about engagement and interactivity. But to wrap it all up, it all starts with our own center. And the more connected we are with that, the more creative we're going to be in every area of our lives. And also, the more fulfilling life is going to be. Because being fully present in what we're doing is the greatest source of new ideas, new innovations, and also living life fully. So, let me end with one of my favorite quotes from Archimedes. He said, "Give me a place to stand and I can move the world." And so often, connecting with that place from which we can stand and move the world is getting harder and harder in our modern times, where being hyper-connected and being always on and being afraid we're missing something have become perennial obstacles to creativity. So let's turn that around. Let's practice our digital detox. Let's trust our own instincts and our own creative impulses. And let's recognize that even if it doesn't lead to a masterpiece, it dramatically enhances our life and the life of those around us. Thank you so much.